Hi, how you doing?
Hi, I'm doing good. How about you?
Not bad. We have torrential rains today, but otherwise things are fine. What happens particularly in the summer is hurricanes and tropical storms that start in the southern Atlantic and Caribbean will end up going up the east coast of North America. And by the time they get to Boston, they're no longer hurricanes, but this, may give us 8 or 10 centimeters of rain. So it's substantial.
That's so much of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how you doing, man?
Good, good.
That's great.
Things are going well, slowly heading toward normal.
Yeah,
COVID.
yes.
How is Pakistan doing with respect to COVID?
Pakistan is doing well nowadays. Might be if there is any number, I'm not aware of that. But I did not hear any news about Corona. It's been long, and I mean we are following SOPs most of the time. But even if people are not following SOPs, so of course they are vaccinated. So after the vaccination, things are a bit better.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. It's been so variable among countries
Yeah.
for both biological and political reasons. It's kind of an
More about the
interesting.
political reasons, I must say.
Oh gosh, in the United States, something like 87% of people in the Democratic Party have either been vaccinated or say they're going to. And among Republicans, it's 47%. And for some
Oh,
reason, there's this crazy conspiracy theory that either this is dangerous or somehow it infringes on your
yeah.
rights
In
and
in
liberty.
Pakistan, there are some rumors that people who are getting vaccinated, they are gonna die after 2 years.
Yeah, yeah. It's just, I think there's not much you can do about these except try and, in a sense, do what you're doing fairly generally, try and
Yeah.
expose people to the truth and logic and go from there.
True. I heard a joke that says like there was a person who went to the hospital for the vaccination, and he said, I mean, I don't want to get vaccinated. If I know, so am I gonna survive after 2 years? So nurse said, what will you do alone in the world? Get vaccinated.
Yeah, I like
So
that.
it's
True.
so
Yeah.
it's better to get vaccinated. Like what would you do all alone? I mean, is it more like the movie I Am Legend from the Will Smith? If you have seen that.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
good.
All right. So today we are going to talk about the global change.
Hmm.
So if I ask you what is global change, Andrew?
Well, I think that we live at an unusual time, and that is if by every measurement we can make of the oceans and the atmosphere, they are changing at a very fast rate.
All
So
right.
I think one thing that everyone has read about is global warming, and that's not a hypothesis. That has been documented by tons of data around the world. We know the reason for it. It is increased amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We know why there's increased amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and that's because of human activities. So, we can go into detail, but the plain fact is that many measurements say that our Earth is probably has changed more in my lifetime than it did in the 1,000 years before that.
All right. And how global change is different than the climate change?
Well, global change has a number of aspects.
All
Um,
right.
One of them is climate change. It turns out that by putting more CO2 into the atmosphere, that makes temperatures higher because of greenhouse gases. Some of that CO2 gets dissolved in the oceans, and that pushes down the pH of seawater, something called ocean acidification. The warmth removes oxygen from the oceans. And then in addition to all of those things that are either directly or indirectly related to things like CO2, there are important aspects of global change for the biota that come from habitat destruction, pollution, exploitation of species. So it's a combination of things that have to do with you know, our lifestyles, and some things that, uh, well, it still comes from our lifestyles, but it is how that affects the physical environment in which we live.
All right. So, what do you think this global change or the one aspect of it, which is the climate change, is because of the humans, or is there
Yeah,
any
well,
other
like I
reason?
said, I think there's a very good chain of observations. Again, this isn't a hypothesis. This isn't somebody's, idea off the cuff. We know from measurements that temperatures are rising throughout the world. We know from measurements that carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere are growing. They're about a third higher than when I was born, which, again, that on a geologic timescale, that's quite remarkable. And it turns out, because of the chemistry of carbon, we can actually fingerprint the source of the carbon dioxide that is accumulating in the atmosphere. And there's no question that most of it comes from the burning of fossil fuels, with maybe about 20% comes from clearing, say, forests for agriculture, and because a lot of the carbon in the trees goes back into the atmosphere. But mostly it is burning fossil fuels.
All right. So, what are the threats if we see it after 10 years? So, what are the threats that we are going to face, might be because of this climate or the global change?
Well, one of the things that we're seeing, and we're certainly seeing it right now in North America very strongly, is one prediction of global change is that there should be not only on average warmer weather, but more extreme weather events. So we had temperatures of 30 degrees Celsius at the Arctic Circle 2 weeks ago in Canada. We've had record temperatures throughout Western Canada and the Western United States. We are getting a higher probability of strong hurricanes in the Eastern United States and Caribbean. So those things they're actually predictions of global warming. And the other main prediction, and this applies to Pakistan as well, is that in general, places that are fairly dry or semi-arid are predicted to become drier. And again, at least the data that I know come from the southwestern United States, where there is no question measurements of air and groundwater over the last 50 years tell us that that region is getting more and more arid and will continue to do so.
True. All right. So, just as you're mentioning that human beings are one of the reasons for this global change. So, how this global change is affecting the animals?
Well, in a number of ways. So we know that during the previous 100 years leading up to today, there have been a number of, again, measured changes in animals. A lot of it is in population sizes. So there was a big study of insects in Europe, and population sizes have declined by 50% or more. That's very much true of birds in North America. And there's also been, in Australia, for example, 10% of all indigenous animal species or mammal species have gone extinct in the last 50 years. And again, we know the reasons for that. For the most part, those extinctions come from the fact that we have changed habitats, and some of that is inevitable. If we have a growing population, we have to feed them. But every time you cut down a forest and make it into an agricultural field, that lessens the habitat area for animals. We know there has been a lot of exploitation. So people, hunting elephants for their tusks, overfishing. The great majority of the world's commercial fishing grounds are now threatened, and pollution, which is terrible on both. We tend not to notice it in the oceans, but one statistic I read recently suggested that humans put the equivalent of, I can't remember how many garbage trucks full of plastic into the ocean every day. So those things have really put pressure on animal species throughout the world. And now, in addition to that, the world is warming and habitats are changing. So, if you're a given species of bird, the place where you have lived for the last 10,000 years may not be suitable for you to live, by the end of this century. So
True.
global warming is now becoming perhaps the predominant aspect of global change, and it's affecting basically all plant and animal species, including us.
All right. So this is you were mentioning that we're throwing the garbage into the ocean, and humans are the reason for that, and of course animals are suffering. So what do you think? How ocean itself is getting affected? That was from the animals' perspective, but let's talk about the ocean's perspective.
Yeah, well, again, we know from measurements that the pH of the oceans is changing. That is the acidity, if you will. There is something called ocean acidification, which just describes pH going down. And one of the consequences for that is it makes it harder for many organisms that make calcium carbonate skeletons to make those skeletons. So there's a lot of conversation of, will there be coral reefs 100 years from now? And if so, what will they look like? Because we know that when experiments have been done to simulate what we think atmospheric CO2 and that then goes dissolved into the oceans, what that will look like at the end of this century, it drastically reduces the kind of skeletons that corals can make. So the oceans are getting warmer themselves. They are having less oxygen because warmer water can't carry as much oxygen. The pH is going down, which affects the ability of organisms to make skeletons. And as you know, and this is relevant to coastal areas of Pakistan, sea level is going up globally. We may not think a meter of sea level change is a lot, but if you live in Venice or Bangladesh or coastal Thailand, that's substantial. So the oceans are changing just as much as the land is, and it's affecting marine organisms just as much as global change is affecting organisms on land. We just don't see it.
All right. Now, of course, even if we talk about the animals, even if we talk about ocean, environment, climate, everything is going to affect the human beings as well. How do you see how, other than these factors, how global change is affecting human beings? Secondly, second part of the question is, what do you think? Is it really the focus from the governments, from the authorities, that they should do something for this global change so that it would be more effective for us after 5 or 10 years might be?
Yeah, those are both good questions. And I should back up and say, one of the major reasons, there's two major reasons for the kind of global change we're seeing. One is that humans have become more reliant on fossil fuels. Most of the fossil fuels ever burned in the history of the Earth have been burned since World War II. And also, our population size is growing. In some ways, we live in a golden age of humanity that, we've been successful in addressing some major diseases that have been the scourge of humans for years. Rather remarkably, the nations of the world have done a pretty good job of actually feeding a population that has doubled in size in the last century or so. So in some ways, and I should also say that people like me certainly support the aspirations of citizens in all countries to have a better standard of living. So the question is, how can we continue to feed and clothe our population? How can we continue to make life better for many people around the world, but do it in a way that doesn't fuel the fires of global change? And I think there are a lot of people around the world who are working on solutions to that, and there's solutions that go from what you and I can do as individuals to major programs that would certainly need government and international backing. So your question about governments is interesting because at least the governments that I watch closely, which are mostly, to be honest, those in the United States and Canada and Europe, but I think this is true in China and many parts of the world. Governments are finally getting the picture, and they are finally starting at least to talk the talk about addressing global change. In the United States, when we hear about sort of the way some industry-backed people talk about there is no problem with global change, we remember what happened when it was first found that cigarettes cause cancer. And the tobacco industry successfully fought against that for more than a decade, which caused unnecessary deaths of tens of thousands of people. And I think that has made many people aware that we have to watch out for those people who profit from global change. If we want to move away from fossil fuels, we have to recognize that people who own coal mines and pump petroleum are not going to be happy about that. And so I think what we need to do is sort of bring everyone into the picture in a way that can make everyone feel that it's in their personal, family, community, and societal interests to change the way we live our lives.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, we are living in a materialistic world where finance is everything, where these things are everything. And just as you were saying that we have to take everybody on the panel, that everybody is concerned, everybody is taking interest in this global changing. But tell me one thing, is it really affecting the businesses? Is it really affecting the economy, the finances? Because if it does, of course, it's going to affect every single human being living on this earth. They all will be concerned. If it is going to affect the business, we are going to be more concerned about that. What's your opinion on it?
Well, there's no question that global change has a negative effect on finances and the business world. There have been a number of studies in Europe and in North America and certainly other parts of the world that show that, in many cases, the economies will shrink by 10% because of the problems of global change. So if you're in agriculture, you should be concerned because temperatures are changing and water availability is changing. In fact, there was a good study done. I can't remember who did it. I'm sorry, but there was a very good study done about 2 years ago, which estimated that every dollar we spend now to try to ameliorate global change will pay a dividend of $4 by the end of the century. So I think it's false logic to say that business does just fine if we don't change, because many, many different businesses will be affected negatively. And the other side of the coin, which is hopeful, is that the idea of somehow living our lives differently in terms of how we get home, how we get our food, how we get our energy, that will actually be, I'm guessing, perhaps the major source of new employment in coming decades. So there is something to be said that for a world, and you're right, there are a lot of people who think, what's my best way to make a profit? For many people, there will be profit in helping the world to reach a better place.
You've also mentioned, just because we were talking about the essentials for the human being, finance is one of those. Second thing that you've just mentioned is the food. So how is it affecting the food?
Well, it changes productivity on a regional basis, and so there will be places that will be able to grow food better, 20 years from now than they can now. There are many places where agricultural yields will go down, and part of that is that most of the infrastructure for taking those food from the fields and getting it to people is based on the places that are going to suffer with global change. So I think that, we do have, I think, a remarkable capacity to feed the world. I think many places in many parts of the world are becoming more sensitive to global change in the way that agriculture is done. Certainly in the United States and Canada, consumption of beef has declined substantially because people are moving towards sources of protein that require less, they generate less CO2 in the manufacture of those, and there's a healthy movement toward less animal protein in diets anyway. So a lot of things are happening, and the one thing that I really have high hopes for is not that we need to grow more food as population grows, but we need to actually get that food successfully to people. So in Europe, for example, something like a third of the food that is grown in fields is never eaten because it spoils, either on the way to the market or is not bought. So if you think about it, simply by
This is such a
preserving
serious
and
situation.
preparing our food in a different way, we could feed many more people without increased land devoted to agriculture. So that's just one of those areas where bright, creative people like engineers can substantially change, our relationship to food.
So, Andrew, just as you're mentioning, the wastage of the food is happening because of the global warming as well, or might be because of the climate environment. Of course, these are a bit of the perishable items that we usually get. Now, my question is, if it is affecting everybody, it's affecting ocean, it's affecting animals, it's affecting human beings, and human beings are one of the reasons for that. So, what are the steps? And we were also talking about that every human being should take interest into the global warming thing, global change. They should understand it, why and what is happening because of these things. So what are the steps that every individual can take to protect this global warming?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think there are things that all of us can do as individuals. And as I said, there are things that are really going to take concerted efforts on larger scales, and I think it varies depending on where you live. So my living in Boston may actually require different things of my own actions than if you live on a farm outside of Lahore, something like this. But certainly I think in where I live, eating more food that's grown locally helps. Eating a diet that has more of the protein we eat coming from sources that require less or generate less CO2 in formation. I think in a place like Boston, where it's cold in the winter and hot in the summer, the way we insulate our homes can dramatically decrease the amount of energy we spend on heating and cooling. Certainly in North America and Europe, there is a strong movement toward hybrid and electric automobiles. Now, you still have to generate electricity for an electric car, but you can generate that by, say, wind power. You don't need petroleum to do it. So all of those things and many more are things that we can contribute to as individuals. And there's 8 billion of us, so even if what you or I do as an individual is modest, if many people do it, it has a major effect. And at the same time, one has to give engineers credit that the amount of fuel that it takes an airplane to fly between Boston and London has dramatically dropped in the last 20 years. The amount of the distance I can go in my car on a liter of petroleum is twice what it was when I was younger. There are a lot of things that are being done, and I think the real questions are, can we find ways of actually removing CO2 from the atmosphere? That's not something you and I are going to do on our rooftops, but there are actually pilot programs that are successful in scrubbing carbon dioxide from air. Now, they're expensive and you can't do it on a scale that would change the world, but it shows there's a path forward. Also, one of the big impediments to making better use of, say, electric automobiles and other things that use renewable fuel sources is batteries, because you need good batteries to be able to use these. And so again, there's a lot of research on batteries that have much more favorable properties than the ones we use now. So I think when you back up, I think the hopeful thing is that unlike global change in geologic history, we know we're the source of that global change now, and because humans have a great deal of collective ingenuity, we can be the solution if we choose to be. And if we
Wonderful
don't,
statement.
if we don't, I hesitate to say we'll get what we deserve, because a lot of people will get what other people deserve in this case. But I think we just all have to do what we can to make a world that our grandchildren can thrive in.
And it's not only for us, it's going to affect the next generation, it's going to affect our children. So we need to work on it. True. And all the solutions. Yes, please continue.
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, yesterday I was talking to someone from a sort of think tank group in the United States whose motto is, "We strive to be better ancestors." I think that's the way we all should think.
Oh, that's a wonderful statement. Good one. Yeah. So that was also one of the best statement that I got from you today. That if we are the reason for this, so we are also gonna suffer from this. That's true. So we have to look for the positive ways, positive things that are going to give us benefit quite near in future, inshallah. So, well, Andrew, thank you so very much for this comprehensive talk. It was such a lovely moment to listening to you.